Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Jeremy McGovern. I'm the executive editor for American Farriers Journal. I want to welcome you to tonight's online hoof care classroom. This session is brought to you by our friends at Glushu. And before we begin, I want to remind you that this session is being recorded. We will have it up tomorrow. So if you need to jump off at any point or you want to revisit some of the tips from this webinar, we'll have that up tomorrow. You can watch it at your leisure. And we will have a Q&A after the presentation. And at any time, you can type in your questions into the Q&A field or the chat field. We'll go through as many of these as possible. At this time, I'd like to thank tonight's sponsor. Glushu Adhesives is making innovative products since 2006. Glushu designed different acrylic, urethane, and acid-free silicone products for every purpose. Besides the very wide product range of glues and pour-ins, the revolutionary Glushu glue-on shoe is your perfect partner to solve many hoof problems. Glushu is a flexible cuff bonded to a specially designed aluminum horseshoe. This gives the horse a light, hoof-supporting cushioned shoe, which eliminates any stress or damage to the horse's hoof and is easy to apply. Glushu and Glushu products are available in most well-known Farrier supply stores, and Glushu is pleased to sponsor tonight's webinar. And so right now I'd like to welcome our clinician, Roy Verocay. Welcome, Roy.
Hey, how you doing? Good evening.
Great. And for those who don't know Roy, he's a Farrier based in Florida. He's a Glushu clinician and also owner of worldwidefarriersupply.com. I had the pleasure of seeing Roy work at the Northeast Farrier Supply Clinic back in September, which was featured in the December issue of American Farriers Journal. And so I can say from firsthand experience, if you do get a chance to see him work and attend one of his clinics, be sure to take that chance. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Roy.
All right, thank you. I just want to thank the American Farriers Journal and Glushu for sponsoring this. I want to thank everyone for logging in with us this evening. And what we are going to be talking about is modern materials and therapeutic applications. So in the beginning, we're going to start with a little basics on gluing and how things work, because overall, the clinics and demos that I do, I get a lot of the same questions. So I try to compile here some of the things that most people ask. Moving on, we're gonna talk a little bit about my background with gluing and how I hated it at the beginning. And then I started to understand it better. And in the early beginnings, when I started shoeing around 1998, the glue-on products, the idea of gluing on shoes was very new, and it tended to not work quite as well as it does today. The path of discovery came through different clinicians coming to the school that I attended, and I got very interested on how to be able to help those horses where we don't have a sufficient wall or strong enough wall to fasten a shoe the traditional method with nails. The trial and error process was pretty tedious and pretty aggravating. So I started with different products, different techniques that I really did not understand. And I see it today with some people that tend to blame a product because they don't know how to use it correctly. And that's what I was doing back then. So I had some success with trial and error, but then when I finally went to the local farrier in the town that I was in Tennessee, it was a farrier named Mike Scanador. I asked for help and he explained a few things to me, and it made it so much easier and I understood it. And now we started getting things right and we started getting sound horses. So when you are not sure on how to use a product, when it comes to gluing or anything else, look for expert advice, the people that make it, the people that promote it, the people that understand that product inside and out. So brands of glue-on shoes and modern shoes that are not the traditional aluminum or steel shoes. As many of you know, Epona, Duplo, Sound Horse Technologies, Polyflex, and Glushu. Today's lecture, we're going to be talking about some cases that I worked on, and mostly focusing on my work with the Glushu because it's a shoe that is my go-to. I have used all of these. I still use some of these, and we're going to go through it and show you what can be achieved when you use these products. So there are two basic methods of gluing on a shoe. You can have a direct method and an indirect method. The direct method, which is not what you're going to see today, is basically fastening a shoe by gluing the rim of the shoe to the bottom of the foot. And the indirect method is by a cuff, would it be cloth or rubber or plastic. So we are going to focus on the indirect method. But for both methods, you can see here an example of the indirect method, and you see the cuff glued to the sidewall, and there is no glue fastening the bottom of the shoe to the bottom of the foot. When we talk about gluing techniques and things to consider, we're going to see that those apply for both direct and indirect methods. A question that I get a lot is what happens when you have an indirect method, glue on shoe, and the horse steps on the shoe, hooks it on a fence, and does it damage the wall? Well, this is a horse that I did a set of glue-ons, and about 4 weeks into the shoeing, they called me that they found the shoe on the fence. And once I removed the glue, and if you can see here, the glue and the cuff that was left on the foot, and cleaned it up and prepped it for gluing the new shoe, the hoof looks perfectly healthy and perfectly normal. There was no tears of the wall, no ripping pieces of the wall. Glushu is actually designed to break at the edge of the cuff and the shoe, therefore leaving the glue and the cuff so it can be removed safely at the end when you need to come and replace that shoe. Things to consider when gluing. Don't get too comfortable, because even me, when I glue hundreds of pairs of shoes, thousands probably, you take it for granted and you just go too fast, or you don't pay attention to the steps that you should be following, and then becomes a fail when the shoe comes off the day after. Climate and temperature, that's very, very important. And here in the US, we have such a disparity from temperatures. Here in Florida, it's not such a great deal because we don't get very, very cold winters, and they're not long. But if you're up north, it's much more important to you to try to keep your glue and your shoes and an environment that is warmer so they work properly. Glue, being acrylic or urethane, is sensitive to the temperature, and the speed on which the glue will set is given by the temperature. So when you have a tube that stays within 80 degrees, 75 to 85 degrees, is going to set at a certain time, probably anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes. And if you lower that temperature, like here, we do it in the summer because of the excessive heat, we try to cool the glue so it gives us a little more work time. If it's a horse that is sore or is not standing well, you want the glue to set as fast as possible. But if it's a horse that gives you time to work, or if you're not very experienced and it's going to take you a little more time to adjust your shoe, you want to have the glue a little slower. So you might want to cool it down in the summer months. The glue ratio is always very important, because even urethane glue or acrylic glue, it's 2 parts that mix as you pour them into a cup. You mix them with a stick, or they mix through a tip. That's always important to equalize the tube before you even mix it on the cup, or when you use a fresh tube. Once you equalize it the first time, you don't have to do it again. But you equalize that tube, then you put your tip or pour it in the cup. So the glue and the activator ratio has to be adequate. If you don't have a proper mix, the glue will not set, or it will set too fast, and that will create a problem. Adding different products to the glue, a lot of us, and a lot of the people that I know, we always add copper sulfate crystals. That helps the foot stay hard and healthy under the glue. And then you can always add the product. You don't want to use more than like 20% of the full volume of the glue that you're using. In this case, you're going to have to mix in a cup, because if you're using a tip, you can't mix it in. Mixing the glue is your preference if you need to use it, if you want to use a tip, or if you want to mix in a cup. Working time, we were talking about temperature, is the time that the glue allows you to put it on the shoe or put the shoe on the foot. Curing time is from the moment that it starts to set until it's done and you can load weight, move the horse around. When we have glue and gluing, it's basically the same principles of when you have a fire. It's a tripod. So in order to have a fire, you need oxygen, heat, and fuel. If you take any of those three out of the equation, you cannot have a fire. So when you are gluing, you have the similar triangle that is going to keep you from having failures and is going to keep you with success while gluing. One, the foot needs to be prepped and clean. It needs to be dry, and the temperature needs to be right. So warming up your glue or cooling it is going to make a big difference and a big impact on how long you're going to spend trying to work with that glue and how long you're going to wait until that glue is set. Here we have an example of mixing glue in a cup, and you see there's a little fiberglass. There's copper sulfate on it and some Kevlar fabric in it, just to create a patch. This one is not going to be used to glue a shoe on, but to create a patch on a crack, you can mix those Kevlar fabrics into it. You just chop them very finely and mix them in with the glue. Always keeping that ratio that you don't want to exceed anything you add to the glue to more than 20% of the total volume. On this case, mixing tips, sometimes people prefer them. I use a lot of glue, and I have already a method of how many pumps I need in the cup to glue a certain size shoe. So, and I'm always mixing copper sulfate. So my go-to is with the cup. If you are using a mixing tip, after you equalize your tube without the mixing tip on, you have to squirt through the tip and probably discard the first pump that comes out of the tip, because then you achieve a very accurate mix. If you guys look inside of the tips, is a bunch of little maze-like plastic compartments that allows both sides of the glue and the activator to mix together and be a proper mix when it comes out of the end. So be always sure to dispose of the first squirt, maybe two, when you're using mixing tips. Here on this horse, it had a low angle. It was a negative Palmer angle. So I built the heels with some acrylic glue, and then I removed the front cuff of the shoe to set the shoe back and allow me for a little more breakover. And as you can see, once you finish the glue properly here on the photo on the right-hand side of the screen, and you taper the edges with a little bit of a bead of glue at the end, and then clean it out, buff it, or file it, it looks like the cuff becomes part of the hoof, and you don't have that big step between the cuff and the hoof wall. And also this allows the hoof, if he's going to step with the other foot over it, to slide over the cuff and not start working the cuff loose from the foot. This horse presented a very low angle, and once we trimmed it, the wall was very, very brittle, and he still had a decent thickness on the wall, but the wall quality wasn't good. And the owner requested that we glued him instead of nailing him. The owner told us that he didn't do good with nails most of the time. He always tend to be sore after shoeing. After applying an indirect glue and the shoe, the horse was perfectly fine, never had a problem. So those are options that you have when you're using a glue-on shoe instead of nails. You can add frog support. You can do the inserts, or you can do a pour-on pad. And when I do a pour-on pad without the insert, I put a mesh that I glue inside the shoe, and then I pour normally like you would do with any other pour-on pad. When the mesh glues onto the foot with the cuff, It's not going to move, and it's the same as if you were nailing the mesh with the shoe. This is the first study case that we're going to be looking at today. This is a 20-year-old broodmare, warm blood, named Tessa. She was brought to me with a lameness of 3 out of 5 at a walk, constantly shifting weight when she was in the cross ties, left foot to right foot. She's been chronic founder for 3 years. Apparently, she had white line disease. It wasn't confirmed by any lab work, but the crumbly, chalky material between the wall. So that was on both front feet. The back feet, thank God, were pretty healthy. So she was able to hold her weight on the backs, but we were afraid that now at that point she was going to start with another acute laminitic process. So it was time to do something. She hadn't had any farrier care for the past 6 months before our appointment. So when I got to appointment, this is what I was presented with. And if you look on the picture on the left, here is all the separation from the wall. And as you can see, most of you know that if you see this, once you start cleaning this part of the wall, the external part, and debriding everything that's affected by white line, you're probably not going to have a whole lot of hoof to nail on. And here on the right, we have trimmed a little bit on the side, and this is a view from the left foot, and you see the crack just peeling the hoof wall off of the lamina. So this is the bottom of the foot, and she had quite amount of thrush. She had different parts here that were very, very soft to the touch just with your finger. I didn't even use hoof testers because it was already obvious that she was sore. And just by pushing with my fingers, this would depress this areas on the outside of the bar. And you'll see once we cleaned it up, that's the other foot. And again, she had a really soft spot right here at the tip of the frog. She had pretty deep thrush at the center of the frog. And here you can see when I started cleaning it, you can see the spots right here. There were all bruises and hematomas under the sole that she had. And you can see the stretching of the lamina here at the toe. On this foot, she had a big pocket of an abscess in the medial side of the hoof. So at this instance, because of the way that the sole looked, it wasn't advisable to cover it with any kind of pad. So we would trap all that infection and create a pocket for more disasters to happen if we covered it. So this way the owners were able to clean it and treat it. And we contemplated doing a hospital plate if she wasn't doing okay. But once we got the shoes on, she actually walked much better. So we decided not to do the hospital plate. Here we have some of the resected areas, and you see how high it went once I finished cutting away all the affected areas. And this black that you see here is because I was torching it just to dry it because it was very, very wet. Once I rinsed it with an antiseptic, then I wanted to make sure that everything was really dry before I was going to attempt to glue it. And here you see these tracks running up from the bottom of the foot up the wall. It's always very, very important that when you dry a foot with a torch, you wire brush and clean the foot again, because if you put glue over that burn material that is on the wall, the glue is going to adhere to that material and not the actual wall, and then the shoe will come off eventually. And here we have the shoe. I modified it. I removed the front tab of the shoe, and actually I set it reversed because I didn't want any pressure on those hematomas and all that soft area on the sole at the toe. And I modified the edge of the cuff to go lower and not go above, because this cuff would go this way if you didn't trim it. And here you have the other foot, and you can see now we're providing caudal support and taking pressure off of the toe area. This is when I came back. We let her grow for about 8 weeks because she really wasn't growing any foot. They changed her diet. They started with supplements, and finally she started growing foot. So at 8 weeks, this is what it looked like. And once we removed the shoe, you see that those areas that were really, really soft and full of hematomas and abscesses, they started to dry up and get a little healthier. Here you still have a little spot where still needed to be treated. But for overall, the health of the hoof was improving. And as I removed the shoe, I left this part of the glue because there was no wall on that side at all and nothing was happening. So I was going to glue right over that on this next shoeing. And here you can see on the left, this is when the shoe was removed. And you can see they've been treating it with copper sulfate, and you have a little bit of dish on the wall, and the separation from the lamina that was all in this area, now it's all dry and it's hard. So the improvements were being achieved. Here's after the trim, we aligned the dorsal wall, we removed that dish, and we started working on the flares also. This is the foot. You see the amount of heel that she grew in 8 weeks after the change of diet. So we lower the heel again, aligned it to a more natural angle. And when I align a foot, the pastern and hoof angle, I just do it to the natural angle. I don't really measure it. I just make sure that my pastern and my hoof wall are aligned and look harmonious. So here you have, because now all the white line was done because it's an anaerobic bacteria. So once you expose it to air and you treat it, you basically kill it, and there was no active white line anymore. So we decided to do the shoes forward, and I left the cuff to protect the front. There was no needed treatment for the dorsal wall, and the same as you can see on this one, all that was cleaned and then covered with the cuff and the glue. Here you have a picture of both front feet finished after the second shoeing. And if you remember what those pictures looked when we started, that's a huge improvement. Now she was 1 out of 5 lame and only on turns. So that was a huge improvement for this mare. And here is 18 months after the initial shoeing. We were finally able to go back to a normal steel shoe and nail it. We still had some little cracks at the end, but those were going to be trimmed out at the next shoeing. And unfortunately, we never got to finish shoeing her properly because she ended up having a colic and had to be put down. She was older and she was not in good health, so they didn't want to go through putting her through surgery. So you can see here still some of the separation and some of the little pieces of the wall that needed to grow. And that's my bad. I forgot to trim that little guy right there. There's nothing better than taking pictures because you see mistakes on your work. The next study case that we have is Bucky, which is a 19-year-old miniature horse. It was lame at a walk, 4 out of 5 lame. He was having a really hard time standing. And he was reluctant to come out of the stall. They had it really padded, and the center aisle was concrete. So he looked at that aisle thinking, I really don't want to step there. So we required the help of the vet that came over and blocked both front feet. So he was more comfortable while we were working on him. And he was laying down for long periods of time during the day. He was in the acute stage of laminitis in the front hoofs, and he had strong digital pulse on both. The white line was on all 4 hoofs, and but there was no strong digital pulse on the hind end. And the last Farrier visit was 10 weeks prior to our appointment. And as you can see the separation and some of the growth rings, how they're closer together at the toe and more spread apart from the heel. And that's an indication to me that this miniature horse was previously foundered or chronic founder before this episode of laminitis. So over here at the edge of the white line, you can see all the separation, and we performed a resection, and then we decided to give him frog support with inserts for the Glushu. because there was no active abscesses or anything, any live tissue on the bottom of the foot. So we were able to cover it and provide some more support. That's what I would have liked to do on the previous case, but because of the abscessing and all the live tissue, you never want to cover that or apply glue over it. So what we did is the inserts come with this rim, and you can do it upside down. So if you want to leave this rim inside of the shoe, inside of the cuff, you can leave it. To me, it's easier to trim it off and just put the insert from the ground surface of the shoe after I apply the glue. And I use the same acrylic glue to fasten the insert to the shoe prior to putting it on the horse. It's much easier to do it that way than trying to glue that insert once you have the shoe on the foot. What you want to make sure here, when you finish gluing it and it's set and you're ready to go, clean all little bumps or high points on glue or the insert so there's no transfer of pressure onto the foot. And here I'm grinding omnidirectional breakover around the whole surface of the shoe, and more so at the toe to allow for more breakover. If you see here, I grind the front of the shoe quite a bit, and you can see the aluminum shoe that is inside of it. And you see here all the grinding that I did to make sure that this was completely flattened. There was no high spots anywhere on the bottom. And, you know, working with these shoes, a lot of people wonder, like, oh, if I see the aluminum, is it going to start falling apart and the rubber coming off of the shoe? And it's not going to happen. That rubber is vulcanized to the shoe. And even if I have done endurance horses with these shoes, and when they wear off the rubber, the aluminum still stuck to the foot surface of the rubber. So just make sure that you grind whatever you need to grind. It's not going to hurt the shoe any. I mean, as long as you don't grind the aluminum shoe more than half its width. Here we mixed dental impression material, and this is the Shore A15. So it's the softest one that I have, that Glushu provides. So they have other densities. They have Shore A25 and harder, but for this case, I wanted to just give them cushion and support. So the support was given by the frog insert and the cushion by the dental impression material. And I stayed behind the tip of the frog with my my dental impression material, and then I placed my shoe where I needed it. And when you're mixing the dental impression material, this is a very small amount because it's a very tiny foot, but you always want to use equal amounts of both parts and mix it thoroughly so you don't have streaks of blue or white or pink on white or green and white, whichever color the dental impression might be. Right here, that day, the actual vet for that mini wasn't available, so some other vet came over and didn't have the capability of shooting x-rays right then and there, so we didn't have any before we did the shoeing. But this is a couple of days after, a day after we did the shoeing, and then they emailed me the x-rays, and the phalangeal alignment looks quite okay in my opinion, considering that I didn't have nothing to go by. I just did it by gauging the pastern angle and the hoof wall angle. And here you see I grind off most of the toe rubber on the shoes, and you can see the resection on the front of the foot. And that was all white line, and you can see the stretch lamina that was underneath. So once you apply your shoe, what happened here? Hold on. When you apply the shoe on the foot, if you look here on the left, you set your shoe in the position you need, and then I usually do a pretty tight wrap with the saran wrap or foil, and then immediately I put the foot down, especially because it's not a direct glue method, so there's not going to be any glue squeezing out of in between the shoe and the foot. The glue is on the wall, and this will keep the side tabs flush and against the wall. And that's that little guy right there. And immediately after the shoeing, he started chewing and licking, and he was actually maybe 2 or 3 out of 5 lame. So he was able to walk back to the stall in a much better shape than he walked out of the stall. Here we have another study case. His name is Roach. Is a 3-week old quarter horse colt that I did back in 2018, I think it was. And he presented an angular limb deformity. And the deformity that he had is what we call windswept, and refers to both front or hind limbs, in which one present a carpus valgus and it's a medial deviation, and the opposite limb presents a carpus varus that is a lateral deviation. So it looks like the wind just blew both his knees in one direction or another. The right forelimb was the one with the carpus valgus, and the left limb was the one with the carpus varus, and also had a club foot grade 2 on that one, on the left front foot. This is what he looked like. And as you can see, both carpus are pushed over to this side of the colt. So what we proceeded to do is cleaning and trimming very lightly the foot, because at that age he didn't have much to take. So we balanced the foot the best we could, because he already started to present an imbalance on the hoof, and trying to leave as much sole as possible, and then drying the foot with the torch and sanding everything by hand, just because with the size of that foot, you wouldn't be using a buffer. And once we had the foot trimmed and prepared, we started working with the Ibex baby cuffs and trimming the excess extensions and shaping the shoes to the foot. So with the bandsaw, I just remove whatever tabs I do not need. And for example, this one up here on the top right is the right front foot that I had already cut off all the tabs that I didn't need, leaving the medial side to help support the limb and try to correct it. And here's the other shoe for the other foot that I haven't trimmed anything off yet. So all that trimming and grinding, it can be done. You don't have to have a bandsaw, and you don't have to have a grinder. You can do like a bench grinder. You can do it with your nippers and a handheld grinder, or your rasp if you need to. This is the shoe for the left front foot that had the club foot. So we also left some of the toe extension and then the lateral extension, because in order to support that limb in the correct way. The best thing to do, and this is not a cold day in Florida, but the cuff, if you heat it with a torch and you make it softer, once you present it to the foot and you hold it in place, you push it as close as you can to the dorsal wall, it will take the shape of that foot and the angle of the dorsal wall. And if you hold it there until it cools, then it should maintain more of the shape that you're trying to glue it onto. If not, you're going to have a big gap between the toe and the dorsal wall, and then you're going to have to fill that up with glue. And like I always explain, is more glue is not better, really. If you have a thin layer of glue applied properly, then it ends up being a much secure bond compared to a big excess of glue, because the shear forces tend to just snap those. And here we go. I just test the fit one more time. You want to make sure everything is in line and everything is ready to go before you start putting glue on it. Because at that point, in this case, I'm going to use the Shoe Fix White, which is a super fast urethane, and doesn't give you a whole lot of work time. It works great in these cases because the babies are, well, this one is sedated, but they're not going to stand there for a long time, or you don't want to extend the sedation for long. So you want to have everything ready and ready to go before you start gluing. As you can see, also with any glue that I use or any pour-on pad, I equalize the tube, and then I put my mixing tip and discard the first pump. And that's what I'm doing on the picture right here on the left-hand side. Right here on the right, I'm applying a thin bead of glue, maybe a 1/4 inch bead across the whole cuff on the toe and the quarters all the way to the heel. and then I put it onto the foot and make sure that you clean any excess glue that might bleed into the wall, to the sole or inside of the rim of the shoe, because you don't want to create any sole pressure, especially these little guys. Once I had that glue cleaned up, I pressed and I held it in place, because with the urethane glue, you're only going to have to hold it anywhere from, depending on the temperature again, anywhere from, I don't know, 45 seconds to a minute and 15 seconds, and that will be as set as it's going to be. So here I held it in place, and then I held it in the air for maybe another 30 seconds, and then I was ready to work on the other foot. And as you can see here, you can see this is the left front, and you have the toe extension, and you can't see because of the glare, but the lateral extension is right here. Here you can see both. They're glued and ready to go. There is quite a bit of glue that I build up in between the toe extension and the end of the shoe, so it would be a little stronger and it wouldn't bend it. But here you can see, this was when we showed up to shoe the baby. This is right after the shoeing, once he woke up, and this is maybe about 4 weeks later, 3.5, 4 weeks later, after the second shoeing, and you can see how the limb has straightened out considerably. The left front was pretty much as straight as it needed to get, which it was the better of the two. And we had another shoeing to correct the the right front before he actually moved up north. And when he left, he was pretty straight, and I didn't see any issues or any reason to keep gluing him and putting extensions. He was pretty stable. And after 4 weeks, he hadn't turned again. So once he went to their new owner, ended up, just for what I know, straight up. So I guess we can go into the questions.
Yes, we got a few questions already. And in case anybody joined us late, feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A field or the chat field. We'll go through whatever questions you have. This is a good opportunity for you to ask either some of the questions on what Roy presented on, or really any other questions about adhesives. So I'll begin with this question. How do you price your use of glue and specialty shoes?
Well, usually the way that I price my gluing is I have my basic price for, let's say, front shoes. And if now instead of regular nailed on shoes is going to be a glue on job, I charge the same amount as I would if I was going to nail, because we all know that in between nails and shoes, you probably have $12, maybe $15, $17, depending on what shoes you're using or what nails you're using. And then I add the full cost of all the products that I'm going to be using. And then I add double the cost of the product. So what ended up being, let's use round numbers. Let's say you charge $10 to shoe the front feet. You have $5 in glue and shoes. Then I charge $20 to shoe the front end. So then you can make it with your numbers, however that would make sense.
Okay.
Some people charge a lot more than that, but it's what the market will bear in the area that you are, Sure.
What type of glue or material do you like to use for filling a wall crack?
For wall cracks, I usually use the acrylic glue. And like I showed on that cup that we were mixing the copper sulfate and the carbon fiber cloth, it makes a very, very, very sturdy patch. And then you can use layers of fabric like the carbon fiber or acrylic or fiberglass on top and put more layers of glue, and then that usually keeps it pretty good. That's the one I go to. Okay.
Is 4 weeks typical for working extensions on a young horse?
Yes, I usually, it all depends on the evolution of the shoeing, But I usually give them a 4-week appointment when I leave, and I ask them to send me pictures in between once a week of the progress. And if I see that something is not going quite right, I might even shorten it, if I see that the need to do it sooner. But usually 4 weeks is what I normally use for a shoeing period between those type of shoeings.
Okay. How would you describe Glushu and like sand versus polytrack?
Glushu and what?
Well, I'm going to read it into this question. I'm going to guess it's talking a little bit about how it performs in different surfaces. So in the particular, maybe sand or dirt versus polytrack, synthetic surface.
Okay. They're usually not very grippy, so they don't have a whole lot of traction unless you add it to them. And the Glushu is already drilled for the 5/16 hole that we need to tap to put studs. So the clients that do cross country or they do eventing, they can put studs when they need it. But really, when you're in any kind of surface, they don't provide a whole lot of traction. You have to add it if you need it. So I don't see any problem in having over traction in different surfaces. You know what I mean?
Sure. Okay. If you use mesh before gluing a shoe, do you suggest using a more solid material like gutter guard, or can you use the softer, flexible Equimesh?
Well, I usually use the mesh. I never had good results with the gutter guard because it tends to break easier. The mesh that Vetec has is a really good mesh. I use the one that Glushu has, which is a little stiffer mesh. It's still a fabric mesh, but it's coated a little heavier with a resin or I don't know what they used to coat it, but actually it's easier to mold it into the inside of the foot when you're going to glue it. It just doesn't fall right through the middle of the shoe. So if you don't have the Glushu one, when you're going to glue, the biggest problem is going to be you're trying to expand the cuffs as you're fitting the shoe, and if the mesh is not very sturdy, it might crinkle on you or bend or get out of shape. So I usually use something stiffer, and in that case I probably would use the gutter guard if I didn't have the Glushu mesh.
Okay. Is the Glushu cuff rigid like a Nanrick Ultimate or flexible like a Soundhorse Technology cuff shoe?
Well, the Soundhorse is actually a cloth cuff, and this one is a rubber cuff. So it has some give, and if you touch it, it's pretty soft. So the only difference is that this cuff maintains its shape. The one with the Soundhorse shoes, you have to apply your glue, and then when it hardens, that keeps the shape of that cloth. This one, you're just going to apply the glue inside of that cuff, and it's going to maintain that shape. So it's a softer rubber.
How many days can you safely keep an Ibex shoe on a foal?
Usually never kept them longer than 4 weeks. I don't know. There might be some other people that would go longer, but usually my shoeing cycles for those are 4 weeks.
What is the best way to remove direct shoes? And, well, let's answer direct shoes first and then indirect shoes without compromising the hoof wall.
Okay. The direct glue, usually when I'm going to remove one direct glue on shoe, I grab it with my pullers, at the heel. And once you break that bond, you squeeze the pullers and you break the bond from the heel and the glue, then the shoe will pop right off. It's basically like pulling a nailed on shoe. With the indirect type, there's different methods. For example, if you're working on a Soundhorse technology, you can use a knife to cut the edge between the wall and the shoe and then remove the rest with the rasp. On the glue shoes, because that rubber is pretty abrasion resistant, you're going to be rasping for a little while. But they offer a draw knife, which actually you basically slice thin layers of that rubber until you see the glue, and then the shoe will pop right off. So if you don't have that tool, you can actually rasp it off, but it's going to be quite a bit of work.
Do you always use something like an Ibex baby cuff, or would you ever just use the glue to make the extension?
Sometimes I use the glue if it's something that is not very, if it's not a very long extension, I'll probably use glue, and I use the Shoe Fix, which is the super fast urethane glue, and then that holds pretty well. When it's something that severe like that case that we just looked at, it's better to have the strength of the shoe and the actual plastic extension, and then you can fill it with the urethane glue on top of it if you need to. If you see that colt was very young, but if you have a 6 months old or so that they start getting a little heavier, or say 7, 8 months old, they tend to move and roll the plastic upward just because of the sheer weight of the limb. And then I would make a dam and fill with the urethane glue the outside, in between the outside cuff and the edge of the extension. And I use also the Nanrick shoes, the ones that have the extensions, the same as the Ibex.
And I know you had already addressed how you might price this. Is there anything you would add to that answer with a case of a full extension?
Well, most of the work that we do as farriers, we're not charging for the work that we're doing. We're charging for the knowledge that we have and the time that we have spent trying to learn these skills and apply them correctly. So on a baby cuff, it would probably be 3-4 times the price of a normal shoeing. So because at that point, you are either going to set that colt or filly right for life or wrong for life. Once the growth plates close and there's nothing else you can do, really, you've done whatever you could. And if you didn't do a good job, it's going to show. So it takes a lot of skill and a lot of learning and going to a million conventions and summits and clinics and demos in your area to get to that point. And riding with good farriers, through my career, I was very, very, very lucky to ride with great farriers that show me the ropes on things like this. And now I feel like I'm competent enough to charge what I think is fair for that work.
Yeah, just to put you on the spot, are you doing any clinics anytime soon throughout the U.S.?
Well, the COVID thing has put a damper on it. We usually do quite a few of them. We might do a small clinic up in Northeast Farrier Supply in Connecticut. So if we have a date, I can pass it on to you and you can put it out there.
Sure. For anyone interested, we'll publish any upcoming clinics on AmericanFarriers.com/events. So you can always find farrier events throughout the U.S. and the world at that location. Are you recommending glue-on shoes, or are the vets?
It all depends. Sometimes are the vets, and sometimes it's me. When I feel like the wall is going to be compromised more than helped by the use of nails, I recommend gluing the horse maybe for 2 or 3 cycles until horses that haven't been getting regular foot care and the wall is so damaged that really putting nails are going to be grabbing onto very little wall, even if you drive them high enough. And here in Florida, we're very, very wet. And sometimes in the summer months, there are horses that the wall feels like you're clinching on a sponge. So at that point, I know that before the 5-week cycle, the horse is going to either start losing shoes or the wall's going to start tearing just because of the clinches. So on those cases, I would recommend gluing them for maybe 2 or 3 cycles, and then going back to the normal shoeing. But I see here, Patrick Quinn, he asked the biggest problem, removing the Glushu. So I'm assuming he already had an experience with him. Did we answer that question for him or no?
No, we addressed shoes indirectly.
Yeah.
But I think if you want to talk maybe specifically on removing that, sure.
All right, Patrick. The best way, hands down, to remove the Glushu is purchasing a draw knife, and that way you will not have to struggle trying to get, because if you used them before, you know how well bonded they are to the hoof and how sturdy that rubber is when you're trying to rasp through it. So purchasing that draw knife is going to make your life a lot easier if you do a lot of them. I do maybe 2, 3 sets, 4 sets a week. So I need to be efficient and take those shoes off quickly when I go to reset them, when I go to reshoe the horse. So I have one of the draw knives.
All right, could we go back and let's maybe look at all the case studies at the sort of take a look at the before and afters one more time. There's one specific to the case, but let's go ahead and look at all the cases again.
You want me to go back all the way to the beginning?
Yeah, just to the first case, and then.
Okay.
And again, if you want to review what Roy talked about, you can watch this video tomorrow. We'll upload it to the site.
All right, here we go. We got the first one. This was the warm blood mare that was chronically foundered for 3 years and apparent white line disease on it. So, do you want me to talk the process again?
I don't think we need to go review the cases so much, but just maybe another look at the pictures.
Okay.
Real quickly. And again, we'll have the full video up tomorrow, so you'll have both the narration and the images.
Absolutely.
If you had a specific question on any of the cases here, feel free as we go through.
And you see here on the picture on the left, I made sure not to cover with glue any of the affected areas from the white line, because being an anaerobic bacteria, the last thing you want to do is cover it back up. If you cover a resection that you did to get rid of white line with glue, might as well just leave the wall there, because you're creating the same environment for that bacteria to grow. So.
And then maybe as you're going through these, I'll ask another question. What's your favorite issue to use glue-ons with?
Usually the ones that I use it the most is with laminitic horses, and the laminitic stage, they're so painful, and you're adding trauma to the foot by, pounding on nails. So the horses tend to let me work a lot easier when I'm not hammering on their feet, instead of just gluing something that really doesn't increase the amount of pain. So I use it a lot. I use a lot of glue-ons on laminitic horses. And then, of course, horses with like really weak, thin walls. So,
at what point do you worry about resecting too much wall on the dorsal aspect?
I'm always worried. But the thing is that all those areas that you're resecting when you when you are trying to get rid of white line, or when you're trying to get rid of dead lamina that is from a chronic case, all that material that you're removing, it really has no purpose being there. It's not giving the hoof any substance. It's not giving the hoof any support. It's not giving the hoof any consistency. So being there or not being there is really not going to make much difference to that horse. And you can see when you resect that there's no blood supply to that area. So that layer of wall that was on top of everything else is really not connected to anything. So I'm always very cautious. Well, as I'm resecting, I keep moving upwards towards the coronary band. And as soon as I start seeing good consistency on the wall and healthy tissue, I stop the resection right there. And some resections are on this mare is pretty extreme, but on the little mini that we did on the next case, it's actually not that bad. It only went about 50% of the length of the wall. So.
What kind of suppliers do you get your fiber, whether it's carbon fiber or Kevlar? Where do you get those from?
Well, I usually order all my materials from either Ocala Farrier Supply or Visby or Stockoffs. So I used Stockoffs for a long time because I used to live in Tennessee, and that was the closest supply shop that we had that carried everything I needed. So then a lot of the fibers you can buy not necessarily at a farrier shop. You can buy them at places that sell materials for repairing fiberglass. Here in Florida, we have a lot of places that sell that stuff because of the amount of boats we have. So you can find a lot of those materials in those kind of shops. If you're not close to a Farrier supply and you need something on a pinch, you can go to one of those. So here is what we were talking about on the mini, about the resection. If you look here, we have maybe less than 50% of the wall that was removed on the length of the dorsal wall. So this is not that bad. And then it was healthy tissue from here on up. So I didn't see any reason to keep cutting hoof away. You can see it here also on the middle picture.
Do you use a moisture meter when you're prepping the hoof for gluing?
I live in Florida, so if I use the moisture meter here, it would explode. It's always humid. So no, I don't. I just make sure to do the best I can to remove any debris. I don't use any solvents. If you were going to use some type of solvent to clean after you do your buffing or your filing or your sanding with a sanding block or a sanding file, I recommend the chlorine-free brake cleaner, because it dries really quickly and it doesn't leave any residue. So then the glue will attach to it. I don't use anything. I clean the foot really well, and then I don't put no chemicals in it until I'm ready to glue. And I don't wrap my feet. I don't. I use the shoe fit glue from Glushu, and it's a pretty forgiving glue. Even if I touch it, I'm wearing gloves, and they're powder free because I don't want to add powder to it. But I don't do any extra cleaning after I buff or file or clean the outside of the wall.
Do you gradually build up glue on lightweight fulls and minis when making an extension to avoid overheating?
Yes. And not only that, is because when you do a really thick layer of glue, it will cure on the outside, but the inside is still not quite cured. So I do maybe 1/4 inch beads, and I build on top of each other until I get to the thickness or the length that I need. But yeah, it's much better to do small increments and let that set, and then you do the next one and let that set, and so on.
Then on the Glushu, is using side cuffs alone enough for most applications?
About 98% of the shoes that I put on, I remove the front cuff, because I like to, the same way I set my regular steel or aluminum shoes, I want to have that breakover backed up as much as possible. Here in Florida, horses tend to grow so much toe and not a whole lot of heel. So for my purposes here in Florida, I tend to set my shoes back to keep the weight off of the heels and transfer some of that weight to the toe to alleviate some of the weight on the heel. So yeah, most of them I remove the front cuff. And it's plenty of surface of contact to maintain the shoe there for the serviceable amount of shoeing time. So,
okay, we have a few more questions tonight. What advice would you have for approaching an eventing horse with a 3/4 to 1 inch wall missing on the bottom half of hoof wall from heel to heel?
All the way around?
I'm going to say yes, unless I'm misreading that, Jim.
All right, let me look here.
Yes, that's Jim's says that's pretty much
okay.
what happened.
Usually for that, in that case, I would, if the owners are okay with gluing, I would probably glue it on. But if it's missing that piece of wall, what I do is I build the wall first with the acrylic glue. And then when I shape my foot and it looks normal again, instead of putting nails and going through mostly glue, and just a little bit of wall, I will let that cure, and then I apply my glue-on shoe on top of that.
And when the horse interferes with the opposite hoof, do you have a strategy for reducing the cuff protrusion?
Yes, you can grind down quite a bit of that cuff, and you can round it, so then you don't have to worry about that. And most of those cases, I try to fix any kind of interference with the trimming and balancing the feet. And usually when you get to that point, you're actually fixing the problem. You know, there are horses that are always going to hit, and those horses, then you have to grind down the glue. I mean, the rubber cuff or the bottom side of the shoe.
Okay, then our last question, how long can you typically store glue, and does it help to keep it in the refrigerator?
Hey, Rick. Rick is one of the farriers here local that I know. So yeah, you can store the glue in. I usually store all my glue in the refrigerator. I only put one tube at a time in the rig, you know. So when I put my tube in, I go through a 420 milliliter tube or two a week. So I don't put more than I need in the rig, especially in the summer. So it helps to stay in the refrigerator. And usually in the refrigerator, all the tubes have an expiration date, and within that expiration date, if you're inside of that time frame, the glue should be fine. If you keep it in the summer in the heat in your rig, it's probably going to reduce it by half. You know, you don't want to use a tube that has been sitting in your rig for 6 months through the summer and then in the fall go glue something, because it's probably not going to work quite well.
Okay, well, with that, we'll wrap things up. First, I'd like to thank you, Roy. I really enjoy these sessions where the Q&A is almost as long as the presentation.
Yeah, that's actually the most fun part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this session is being recorded. We'll have it live tomorrow, so keep an eye out in your email. You'll get a notification for that. Also want to thank our sponsor for tonight's session, Glushu Adhesives. Check out their site, check out their other products, and see what you think. And of course, thank you to everyone here for joining us tonight. Really appreciate all the questions. Hope you got as much out of it as I have, and hope to see you here again for another online hoof care classroom. Have a great night.
Thanks. Good night.